Hey guys, Space Marine 658 here. Today I am bringing you a video on how to create a Navball in Unreal Engine 5. This is kind of a complicated topic because, when you're talking about 6 degrees of freedom, when it comes to, designing these kinds of UI, sometimes they can be a little bit complicated. I definitely struggled a lot trying to figure out how to create this in Unreal Engine. So I kind of wanted to walk through it and explain it to other people because I know there's probably a few other people out there that would like to have a similar system in their game. So first, let's go ahead and just shelf what that looks like. So in game, you've got here a Navball, and inside of here, I've got a list of my current speed, as well as the current heading of my ship, and the actual indicator for the current direction I'm facing. Now, as you can see here, when we start accelerating, as you can see here, now we have a velocity indicator. This is marking the direction that my ship is going. Let's go ahead and accelerate pretty quickly. And so if we go ahead and move the Navball, as you can see, it smoothly moves. And if we pitch up and down, it will actually pitch correctly. One of the biggest problems I had was this would sometimes either roll or like do some weird janky movement. But now it completely works as expected. And you see here we have this indicator. This indicates that we are exactly 90 degrees off of our actual velocity indicator. And if we keep rotating around, we also have what's known as a retrograde marker. So this is the exact opposite direction of our velocity indicator. So this is our negative velocity indicator. So we accelerate that direction, we'll actually be slowing down our ship. And then, of course, we have directly to the left of the direction of our velocity. So this is what is known as a negative 90 degree indicator. In real space orbital dynamics, these are used for your, I believe they call them radial in and radial out. In games like this, normal, anti-normal, radial in, radial out, if you're not truly simulating space, you don't have to worry about necessarily how accurate these symbols are. But here, for me, this is just more of an indicator to the player. This is exactly up to the velocity. And then you have exactly left to the velocity and right of the velocity. I think that to the player is much more important than the actual orbital mechanics side of things for my version of my game. Now, but you can see here, so it's our radial in, radial out, and then the other ones before were normal and anti-normal. And so let's go ahead and dive into actually how do you create that. Well, what I have here is on my ship. Let me correct myself. Originally, I had it on the ship. Now this is actually just stationed in the world, very far away from anything. It is it's set up as a non-collider. So on the actual ball here, you can't actually collide with this. It's set to no collision. The material is set to just unlit. It's just a surface opaque unlit. And then I take my texture in here. This is just a simple Navball texture 2D. You want to make sure that when you are creating these Navballs, because you're actually mapping it onto a sphere, that your Navball texture is actually designed to work on a sphere. It isn't actually like a artificial horizon texture that's actually meant to work more like on a cylinder. But let's go ahead and look at our Navball. So what we have here is we have a Navball that is actually the center of this actor here. They've got the texture, it's just a simple sphere. And then on here we have an actual arm. So this arm is the camera's boom arm. And then on top of that we have a bunch of flat planes here with textures on them. So these textures actually handle those different icons, and they are attached to the prograde arm. So as the ship actually, is accelerating, either positive or negative, this prograde arm actually takes in the velocity of the ship's direction and updates these markers. And I'll show you how it does that here in a moment. We also have the spring arm. This is what actually is connected to the camera. This spring arm is actually what we rotate. When we're rotating the ship, we're not rotating the ball because you're going to see a lot of weird jankness with that. We rotate the camera around the ball and you just apply some minor math to that to make it rotate correctly. Then we have a scene capture component. This is our camera. This basically captures this direct forward so that we can display inside of a UI. So now that we've got that, I also here, as a just basic overview, I have some vector parameters within these materials here. And what that does is that just allows me to color these on the fly. So before I start the game, I can change whatever colors of these I want them to be. So I could test out different color patterns and see how they look in game. These are definitely going to change a lot before they're the final version, just because I want them to be very easily visible. And as you can tell here, these colors are kind of hard to see. The yellow's not too bad, but this blue especially is hard to see against that green background. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the UI here. So this object, which I'll show you here how this actually works in a moment, inside of our HUD here, this is just a simple canvas mat here, and this, if you go here, is just a the actual canvas panel here in our Navball, the scene capture 2D component. Inside of here, I just set this to output to the nav render output, which is just a simple texture. And this texture is then being taken in by this material, and I'm taking the inverse of the alpha, and I am passing it into the opacity and then passing in the final color. If you don't use this inverse, you'll see that your material, your object, is actually invisible and everything behind it. You can see, but this will all be like kind of funky looking. But yeah, so we pass that all in, and that is how we get this, this actual Navball icon here in our HUD. And then on top of that, I just have a simple icon here that sits on top of this in the exact same place, because of course, as we rotate the ball, it'll actually make it look like it's rotating, so everything will be correct there. And then I have a simple outline. This is actually just a texture I created in a third-party program. And then I have my two items here. This is a heading text that just, if I go in here, this just gets my player's base, gets the world rotation of the yaw, clamps the axis so that it goes from 0 to 360, and then I pass that into here and just get rid of all the fractional digits so that it's whole numbers, and then I return that back here. And with the speed, I do a very similar thing where I get the speed of the player's ship, and I'm just getting the absolute speed, because in ships, they're thinking about the relativistic velocity. If you're going up, technically that could be a negative number, and you don't want to be adding a negative number because you get a smaller number when in actuality it's a bigger number. Because if you're accelerating forward and let's say down, so you have a negative down and a positive forward. If they're both 10 meters a second, it's going to say it's 0 meters a second, but in actuality, you're accelerating. So you want to make sure that you're taking absolutes and adding those together. And then I did a little math to make it conform to a realistic, number, meters per second. So that is how I get this display. So let's actually talk about the Navball itself and how I do the math behind rotating the actual camera and everything. So on event begin play, I just grab that player pawn and I get it and set it to my reference of player. And then inside of here, I just take the self and I hit show only actor components on the scene capture component 2D. What this does is it should hide any other actors that get in line with the scene capture component. So the idea is this should prevent any other ships or anything being seen in front of the Navball, which is unlikely, but if for some reason they did. And then inside of here, I just have an event tick. First, it just makes sure the player exists. If it doesn't, it checks for the player. If the player does exist, then it's going to come in here. It's going to take this spring arm. So this is the one that actually moves the Navball, and it's going to get the base. So this is the actual player's most main component is the base. Now this could be different depending on what static mesh or whatever you have as your base part of your ship or player character. For me, this is called base, but this could be called anything. For me, it's just a box collider that is my actual root object. From here, I get the rotation, and I pull out the roll, and then I clamp axis the pitch and times it by -1, and then I get the yaw and times that by -1. By feeding these into the spring arm, I get accurate rotational data so that when I'm setting the world rotation, it actually rotates as expected. From there, I pull off the component velocity of that base and I normalize it first, and then I get the vector length. as long as the vector length is greater than 0.1. So that's as long as we're moving faster than 0.1, it's going to display that little velocity indicator. Because of course, if you're sitting completely still, it could be acting all funky at smaller values. And so we just set it to a 0.1 to kind of make sure that, you know, things don't get too wild and crazy. From here, if it is greater than 0.1, you know, we either hide it or show it. So we actually do the whole prograde arm so that all the different icons are hidden or shown. And then from this normalize, so from our component velocity, we're going to pull a rotation from x vector. So what this is doing is this is getting these values, which we're timesing by -1 on both the pitch and yaw again. And we set the world rotation for that prograde r. And so what this is doing is when this ball rotates, we're also rotating this velocity indicator based on the ship's velocity. So basically, if you're going straight forward, it should point at the 0. If you rotate to the 90 degrees and start accelerating, you know, from 90 to this, like, it'll be 270, you're going to see an indicator on this side, on the 90 side, versus if you start accelerating on the 270 side, you'll see it on the 270 side. And so once you have all those set rotations being done every tick, which in theory you probably don't have to do them every tick, but you want to do them frequently enough that the player doesn't feel like they're kind of out of sync. The player wants to make sure that they can actually see those things moving correctly. But yeah, once you got that, you just drop that Navball somewhere in your world, far away from any ships that could run into it. Even though the collision's off, you still want to keep it far away. You want to make sure that your material, so the very basic texture here is set to no MIP maps, and I believe inside of, inside of here. So your actual Navball, you're going to want to make sure that this is set to MIP level. So what this does is this makes sure that even if you're far away from this, you know, ball, this Navball, that it just keeps this texture loaded in at all times. It's always full resolution, that there's no MIP mapping going on, because it can cause it to look real blurry or even impossible to read. But yeah, with that is pretty much everything today for our Navball setup. If you have any questions, definitely leave them down below. But otherwise, good luck and good hunting.